We have mandatory overtime for federal workers to deal with the massive backlog. At the same time, this agency is trying to get rid of 40,000 employees, and we could be seeing more and more overtime being adopted at different federal agencies. It is a sign of a deeper problem. How will it affect you? Let's get into it. According to a memo, the IRS is dropping the hammer over in Kansas City. They've told some of their employees they have to work an additional 16 hours of overtime, no exceptions. This is for the individuals that have at least a fully successful rating on their performance review, and it's also for the people that are trained to fix errors in tax returns. These people are working in the Input Correction Operation, the ICO. These are the guys that are manually reviewing those tax returns. Millions of people have already submitted their tax returns. Some of them, the IRS system identifies for further review. They're checking. Did you input the right information? Did you leave something out? Were your math calculations, were they right? We all know people that kind of get into this gray hazy area. I knew a guy in the Army. He was claiming on his tax return that he had a daycare business because his wife sporadically watched kids in the neighborhood. Now, was that legitimate? I don't know, but he got a huge return each and every year. The IRS is there to adjudicate that, to make that determination. And if you're off on your return, well, then you get that envelope coming in the mail. You either get a refund, an additional refund, or you owe taxes. The memo written by an IRS operation manager says if they don't make a sizable dent in this backlog, there could be more mandatory overtime. It sure would be nice if we could add a number to that language. Sizable dent? What does that even mean? Can we quantify that? Is that 10% reduction, a 40 to 50% reduction of the backlog? This is what the workers are working towards. There should be a goal that they're actually progressing towards. And speaking of workers, it sure would be nice if they had more workers to help out with this task. But the IRS has already fired over 10,000 workers, announcing 30 to 40,000 could also be fired in a short amount of time. The IRS has been really busy this season. Let's look at the numbers and see what they've done. They've processed over 100 million tax returns, issued 85 million refunds, but thousands of returns are stuck and need manual review. And Kansas City is just one of 3 IRS centers. There's one in Utah and there's another one over in Texas. Most people think it's all happening in Washington, D.C. Now, the headquarters to IRS, that is in D.C., but they're not reviewing or processing tax returns over there. They're mainly focused on HR, IT, and policy. It's roughly 5% of the IRS workforce is actually in and around D.C. The rest of it is around the country. And this speaks to the larger story. When you get rid of federal workers, really, it's the entire country that feels the pain. It's not just DC. DC will experience pain, but there are so many economies, like take some of the cities in Oklahoma, some of the towns in Oklahoma. You have tens of thousands of federal workers there. So when you make large overarching policy decisions like getting rid of federal workers, it hurts a lot of different economies, not just DC. The IRS has over 4,000 employees in Texas, 4,000 in California. Georgia has over 2,000, and so does Utah. The IRS, of course, is busier during tax seasons, but they have 2 big problems right now. Number 1 is the massive backlog, and number 2 is a shrinking workforce. As soon as this tax season is completely over, the IRS plans to cut 40% of their workforce. I was talking to one guy who says, they haven't announced any RIF layoffs yet. I think I'm safe. I wouldn't rush to think anyone is safe over at the IRS. They need as many people as possible to get through the tax season. Once that's completely over, you could start seeing the RIF happening. You could start seeing massive reductions. Now, how do you think that the IRS employee feels as they're working and making progress, knowing that every step of progress they make moves them closer to a potential RIF? Do you think morale is high? Do you think they're doing their best work? Probably not. When they were offered the deferred resignation program, over 20,000 people in the IRS volunteered. Many of them were told no. One Kansas City employee said, "I'm stunned by how many people are leaving." And it's not just Kansas City, it's in a lot of these other locations as well, to include DC. So when you have less people, less hands on deck, what does that mean? That means IRS is pretty much forced to push the overtime button, to force their employees to work overtime. But how long will that be a viable strategy? Now, not everybody's upset with overtime. Some people like overtime. It's an opportunity to make more money, especially if you're below GS10. GS10 and below can actually earn time and a half. So what would that look like? If you had an employee making $30 an hour, that same employee would earn $45 an hour for overtime. This calculation depends on the GS grade of the employee, and also you know that taxes are going to come through and take out a huge chunk. Now, what does it mean for the people actually staying doing the work? Former IRS commissioner said that this overtime is another burden on an already overstrained workforce. One Kansas City employee said everything's a mess. People are sick all the time. A lot of people are despondent. And yeah, that makes sense. More people are using their sick leave. In the past, people would hold on to it, try to accumulate a lot of their sick leave so they can use it in conjunction with retirement. But now you have a situation like this happening. People are using their sick leave. And despondent means that people are pretty much checked out mentally. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They're just going through the motions at this point. Another employee said that mandatory overtime is rare at the IRS. It only happens when they're desperate to get ahead of a problem. So yeah, it might be rare, but it isn't entirely new for the IRS. They leaned heavily on overtime to make it through COVID. So in 2022, they had 6,000 employees on mandatory overtime and another 10,000 on voluntary overtime. The employee admitted it was far beyond what we should be asking these people to do. Now, if you look back in 2023, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, they noticed that backlogs were a problem with ICO. So the way that the IRS addressed this issue is they're using seasonal employees, overtime, cross-training, and shifting work to other processing centers. That sounds like a solid plan in 2023, but it's not a plan in 2025. With 40% of the workforce leaving, it's going to be harder to do that. Like, how are you going to cross-train people that are not there? That's going to be impossible. There's only so much that seasonal employees are going to be able to do. But while they're cutting these employees, you know what they are leaning into this time, aside from overtime? They're leaning towards artificial intelligence, and they're using it several different ways, including detecting tax fraud, providing taxpayer service, and improving compliance. There's something over there called the DDB, which is the Dependent Database. It can generate a score on your tax return and say basically whether it should be audited or not. And AI is now integrated into this database. It came out like 20 years ago or so, but they've been improving upon it. It probably will get to the point where you're not going to need humans to review and actually look for errors. AI has demonstrated that it is proficient at reviewing documents. It is proficient at learning and identifying where errors were made. So you could see the IRS start to lean more into systems like this in order to augment their workforce. You're going to cut it by 40%, but the work still needs to be done. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you can use AI in a lot of different creative ways. The IRS is in a pretty unique situation right now because although there's a general federal hiring freeze until July 15th, the IRS as an agency cannot hire anyone this year. At a minimum, they have to wait until 2026. So even though there will be a reduction in force, they will be laying off employees. You have something else in the mix here. You have something called attrition. The attrition rate for the IRS is a lot higher than a regular federal agency. Let's take a look at it. Overall agency attrition is at 8.5%. Taxpayer service division is at 16 to 36%. Customer service positions are at 19%. And return processing staff is at 16%. So if we keep that 8.5% number, what that means is over a year, you will see an additional 8,000 employees leave this agency. That is on top of the 40,000 number. So we're talking about close to 50,000 workers gone from the IRS. And most people will probably be a little happy about it, to be honest, because if you look at the worst agencies or the least desirable agencies in this country, Usually the IRS comes number one. It's ranked number one almost in each and every poll if you look up that data. Now, in addition to this, we have some agencies that have realized they fired people that were critical. So what do? In less than 24 hours, they repost the job announcement. And what ends up happening is they're paying two salaries for one job position. If you want to know more about that, check this video out next. Stay updated by signing up to the free newsletter down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.